You're listening to Masonry Principles, your guide to building better buildings, with hosts Amanda Badian and Phil Leden. Thanks for listening to Masonry Principles. Today we've got Amy Baker of Amy Baker Architect out of Michigan, and we've got Paul Cantarella from Cantarella and Son out of Massachusetts. And both Phil and I are on this episode to discuss the collaborative efforts between architects and contractors and everything that falls in between to build the best project. So thank you so much for being here, Paul and Amy.
Thanks for having us, Amanda.
Yes, thanks, Amanda, for having me.
Absolutely. Both Amy and Paul have been on this podcast before, so it's a really good opportunity for us to just talk about things. I don't think you two don't know each other, right?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Sometimes it's a small world. So, but let's just jump into it. Amy, you're a spec writer. Like that's your specialty within your firm, correct?
Right. I do practice architecture, but I would say the spec writing part of my business is the primary part. It's how I spend most of my day on any given day. So I think that I definitely have a focus on spec writing, but I have practiced architecture for the last 20 years and I'm still doing that. So I kind of wear both hats.
Absolutely. Now, as far as the masonry specs, is that there anything that you call out that maybe other architectural firms or people just aren't aware of that would help in the field?
Yeah, I think just sort of like as a blanket statement, the unit masonry specification, like out of the box from any given kind of spec writing platform, is a bear to edit from scratch. So, when you're starting from a document that's like 40 pages long, it can be a little bit daunting to jump in there and start kind of really understanding what needs to be thinned out. And this section in particular has a lot of opportunities to leave stuff in that just doesn't make a lot of sense for a typical project. So I think like as a starting point, understanding what's in there as a start to the spec is really critical so that we also understand what needs to be backed out of it. There's probably half a dozen flashing options and maybe really only one or two of those tend to get used on a typical project. So I think the biggest thing I see with masonry specs among architectural firms is that they're just not edited well enough for a mason contractor to even understand what they're supposed to be bidding.
Yeah, I'll jump in there real quick because one of my biggest pet peeves is masonry specifications. And I think Amy hit it right on the head. The masonry spec is a long specification, and in general, it takes a lot of time to edit. And so, what we see happening, across the board in Michigan, is many times it's not edited. A lot of firms do utilize Amy and her company, to edit specs and act in that capacity. And some of the larger firms do have spec writers on staff. But speaking, from a personal experience, when I started my career as a design engineer, one of my tasks was editing specifications. And at that time in my career, I knew nothing about masonry, but that was one of my tasks. And so I just chose, in that case, whatever master spec wanted me to choose. And so in many cases, those things didn't apply to a project. And so I just wanted to jump in and real quickly say that, through the MIM, we do have a specification on our website, which is a really good reference. And moving forward into this year, 2023, we're actually going to be developing generic specifications for all of the most common types of wall assemblies. Not all of them, but many of the most common types of wall assemblies that we see. And we're going to pre-edit all those specifications and heavily promote those to the industry because I think that'll really help people edit them. Just wanted to quickly plug kind of what we're doing, here at the MIM to help with this problem, but I do think it is a problem. And mason contractors oftentimes don't have time to read through 47 pages of a spec when really only 12 of them apply to their project.
Yeah, Paul, what's your feedback as far as the spec?
I wanted to piggyback off what you said, Amanda, first thing, which was is better educating everybody. Because really that's what it's about right now. Because like Phil was saying, is he had to write those specs. He's writing specs for jobs where he really doesn't know the specs he's giving out. And honestly, that leads into what I'm going through right now is trying to get out there about all the over reinforcing of the CMU. I got a small uh, little job in town here. I got very small, and I remember, and it's a local architect and a young kid that I know, and somebody a little bit older that I hang out with outside of work. And I went over there I had to drop some samples off or something, and on the way back, I was like, man, that was probably the perfect opportunity to kind of sit down with somebody I feel comfortable with to go like, where do you get your information for that, where you just showed me what you wanted for rebar, like where does that come from? Because at the end of the day, you built a bomb shelter that is nowhere near needed. And so my problem is and again, you've heard it your whole life, copy and paste. Well, I just have another little job that the same architect is looking at something around town here, and I happened to just look through it the other day, and there again in the structurals is literally the same pasted picture with rebar everywhere, and I'm just in my head going again. It's just I think it's easier because they know it's legit, they know it's going to pass everything, and you might as well just put it in there, and I ain't got to do nothing. And they're not really comprehending that it's a lot of extra money. Where I think they probably think it's probably minimal, but that reinforcing and all that can add up to a lot of money on a job. And it goes back to how masonry's been getting priced out by stuff like this.
I think you make a really good point is if we can get the specifications right and narrow it down and filter it to what works, obviously project specific, we're also talking about a cost savings if it's specified correctly.
I mean, honestly, 90% of specifications to 80% have stuff in it that you're scratching your head at.
Right, and then, the frustration I feel like from the contractor standpoint is you wanna be able to have these candid conversations with the architects and the engineers, but then they are the final say. So, like, what is the bridge? And I think this is a good conversation for, to have Amy and Phil, because we have an architect and engineer of, like, how can a contractor approach that topic of, "Let's pump the brakes, we really don't need all of this."
I think Phil nailed that actually. I really think that at the end of the day, yeah, there's a million types of wall types, but there really is only a few of the your basic wall types. I could easily write a spec up for a block wall. You know what I mean? Like he said, you could write that spec up for a generic masonry, just 8-inch block wall. And like he said, start promoting that.
But this is what I'm saying is, like, you're at the project, right? You're reviewing the drawings, the existing drawings. Do you as a contractor feel comfortable going to the architect or the engineer and saying like, "Hey, we don't need as much as you think we need."
At that point, it's too late.
Yeah.
I disagree on that, Paul, a little bit. And so, I mean, I'll disagree by asking you. I mean, even in business a while, let's say you got a building, like the one you were just talking about. Let's say the walls are 14 foot tall. What do you think the reinforcement spacing is required as a contractor? What do you think?
I would think it's nowadays, if you did your numbers, I would think you can get away with 4 foot and a bond beam at the top.
What would you say if I told you that that exact wall could work with reinforcement at 10 foot on center and meet all the code requirements?
I would believe you. That's my problem right now.
So what I did is I wrote an article for Structure Magazine that'll be published in May that goes through all of that, and I provide a table for engineers that gives them a reinforcement size and spacing based on wall height. And in many cases, unless we're in an earthquake area, 10 foot is kind of our max. But engineers in many cases are using 48 or 32 inches. But what I think gives you the ability to go back to engineers is I want to take this and publish something similar in Masonry magazine or in a more of a contractor magazine, because I think if there was something in print that showed you reinforcement sizes and spacings, it would give you more leverage as a contractor to then go back to the design team. And it's not you, Paul Cantarella, going back to them. You're saying, hey, look, someone has already done all this. This is published. This is available. And here's what it needs to be. And I think if you provided a value alternate based on the better spacing and you showed them the dollars and cents of it, I don't think it is too late, personally. I think if you went to the owner and you said, hey, I can save you $200,000, I can meet all the code requirements, here's how I'm going to do it, money talks. And I could be wrong, but I don't think it's too late. I hate hearing it's too late. It's never too late.
Actually, you're music to my ears hearing about the article. And I will say, actually, on this job here, I probably could have done something. But I feel like with the majority of the bidding in Massachusetts, with the file sub bid process, I really, by that point, I have no way of getting in to talk to anybody. Because at the end of the day, you had a file sub bid. Now you're changing something drastically, which changes the bid amount. So I don't know with the public bidding, if that be a major issue, but hands down, honestly, I probably had a great opportunity for this little job in town because it was nothing like that. But it's what you just said, because I'm going these last few weeks where do I have to Google something? I'm like, where is I've been hearing about it through the MCAA, you know what I mean? I've been hearing people talk about it, but I'm like, I don't have something in, you know what I mean, to go, hey guys, besides me, Paul Cantarella telling you this, which is just amazing. Like this, like you said, Phil, here's written article about this. So I think, like you said, Phil, I probably do got to think a little bit more outside the box and try to push that a little bit more. But and hear me out. If you end up writing something, that's one hell of a fire to be able to go in there with, because, like you said, everybody does like saving money.
Yeah, I mean, I think the onus is on our industry. We need to provide more resources, and that's an area that we've lacked for a very long time. And so, I mean, it's to everyone, you know. I mean, we need more resources available to contractors to do things right. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Paul. There's nothing worse for me in terms of selling masonry than convincing an architect to use masonry, goes out to bid, gets awarded to a low bid contractor, and it comes out looking terrible. That's the worst thing for us. And so we need to invest in training contractors. You know, to Amy and her point, we need to provide edited specifications. We can't rely on a 22-year-old fresh out of college to sift through 47 pages and a half a dozen flashing options and pick the right one. And of the engineers, we need to educate them on what's actually required. You know, and until we're willing to do that as an industry, we're just going to keep complaining about it. And, you know, 2023, one of my, you know, resolutions was I'm just done complaining about stuff. We're just going to make things happen. And so that's why we're doing all this. But yeah, I mean, we just need more resources. It's plain and simple.
I think the way you characterized it too is really important, Phil. We have to remember that there's different people on the design teams that are responsible for different types of decisions. So the selection of, using masonry versus another material for both aesthetic reasons and sometimes structural reasons, that's typically sort of driven by the architect. The unit masonry section within the specs is often edited by the architect, but it needs to go through a review by the engineer for coordination purposes. And then when we start talking about the design of the walls themselves, the structural walls, that's a structural engineer's responsibility, not necessarily an architect. So when we're talking about things like rebar spacing, if you start to dive into that topic with an architect, you're probably going to get a lot of blank stares because that's just not a thing that we are responsible for doing generally.
That's very interesting. That's a good one, actually.
Yeah, so we kind of have to know who to direct these questions to and who to, focus on as far as education is concerned, because if we're kind of like throwing information at people, they'll quickly kind of tune out if they already understand that that's not in their wheelhouse. So just knowing your audience is part of the battle here too.
Oh, that's a great point, Amy.
Yes, and I mean, I think it's where we oftentimes see conflicts between drawings and specs as well. You know, Amy, as you hit it right on the head. I mean, some firms have architects and engineers, they're full service AEs, but a lot of firms are only architects or only engineers. And so we're relying on the architect to write the unit masonry spec while the engineer does their engineering. But in every engineering set of drawings, they're going to have a general note sheet with about 800 notes of varying degrees of complexity. And if you want to find a conflict in the drawings, read the masonry general notes on the general note sheet and read the masonry spec, because unless that architect and the engineer coordinate together, you're always going to have some sort of conflict. And so, I mean, there are a lot of different parties involved, and it's just providing all of them with the resources to do things correctly is what's important.
No, and again, back to Amanda saying, better educated. Really, better educated is the top thing. That's hands down. And honestly, I've I laugh because I just started really listening to the podcast a couple of weeks ago. So again, this is another great platform to hopefully get people, listen and get the word out there.
Yeah, I mean, our whole objective of just getting the information and making it available. I feel like, I had a marketing campaign of the best kept secret or hidden in plain sight. And it's like those days have to go, they have to be behind us. We have to get the information out there and make it so it's accessible and easy to find. I feel like Phil's doing a fantastic job of just creating so much technical content and it's easily accessible for the members of MIM and, the people that reach out to Phil directly. But with that being said, as far as like specs and, what we could do to be a little bit better each project, on a project by project basis, a little bit more with a broader brush of what trends are you seeing in masonry, both from the architectural side and on the contractor side that you could see, like they're going to be here for a while, whether it's aesthetically or structurally. Like, what are some things that you're noticing that we didn't really do before that we're doing now, and you think they're going to stick?
I think that one of the trends I'm seeing is actually more of a process trend, and it's related back to the forms of agreement with the general contractor or the construction manager. So, a lot of the projects that I work on, they have an owner contractor agreement that's based on a CM at risk scenario, which means in reality that the CM is usually on board sometime in the design phase, which is fantastic because they can help inform the owner with earlier pricing. And also, in some cases, I'm starting to see more collaboration between the design team and the CM, who often pulls in the subcontractors, including sometimes the mason contractors. So I think that's a really positive thing that I've been involved in recently is getting a chance to communicate more directly with the subcontractors for larger projects that are based on a CM at risk delivery method. And what that does is it means that we can ask those questions during the design phase, like, is this stupid? Would you ever do this? What's your experience using this material versus that? And we can get feedback from the people that are likely going to be the actual installers of it downstream. So I think that that's a super positive scenario that I'm seeing more regularly now.
And where do you think that push is coming from to have a more collaborative effort with the CM at risk? Is it just because of the CM at risk that everybody needs to come together, or is there something happening in the background that's kind of pushing it to have a more collaborative conversation?
I think that a lot of it comes down from what the owner's needs are in terms of their construction agreement with the construction manager. And there's different forms of agreement that they have the option to negotiate with a contractor, meaning it was more common, at least in my area, to see contracts based on a design bid build scenario um, quite a few years ago. But I think that owners now, especially for like university or larger scale projects, are looking for a more integrated delivery method where a CM can kind of like gut check the project with some preliminary pricing while it's being designed so that we don't have that sort of bid day surprise scenario where the design team is essentially documenting and designing the whole building in a vacuum. And then when we issue those drawings, they all go out to bid competitively amongst different general contractors who have, a set of different subs that they're bidding it through. And then, whoops, all of a sudden everything is grossly over budget. So the CM at risk delivery method, I think, helps in the way of allowing the construction team to get an early start and kind of gut check some of these prices earlier in the process. But as a result of that, we also have the benefit of being able to talk to the trades more directly. As an architect, contractually speaking, I'm not allowed to talk directly to the subcontractors, and they're not allowed to talk to me directly unless it's through the CM. So there's some guardrails, procedurally speaking, that we all need to kind of conform with. So, I mean, whenever I get the opportunity to talk to the trades, I think that's really valuable for me as an architect.
That's promising to hear. I've been saying that for years. I just wish I could get in earlier to be able to try to talk with somebody. I think that goes a long ways. But and like you said, Amy, It is hard. There is no direct connection. It's not as simple from the subcontractor to be able to talk to the architect. Like you said, there are the procedures, so that does put a little bit of a damper on it. But I feel that that's pretty promising news to hear.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was contractual agreements of like the architect's not able to talk to the sub and the sub's not able to talk to the architect. So I guess Phil, I want to get you involved because when you are doing your flipping of projects, or what do you like to call that process? I call it project flipping, but some people have argued with me that that's not correct. So what do you call it?
Well, originally, the Masonry Institute of Michigan started the program in like 2008 time frame, and at that time they called it Masonry Alternate Design and used the term MAD. I am not a fan of that because I think, I mean, it definitely applied at the time, but I don't think Masonry should ever be thought of as an alternate. I mean, I think it should be thought of as a possible solution.
Right. So that leads me to kind of the process in which you've been really successful, understanding that architects don't slash can't really speak to the subcontractors, and the subcontractors as well can't also reach out to the architects directly. So is that where, because I know for your process, your contractors are coming to you and saying, hey, let's take a look at these drawings, possibly do a design review. Who's bringing the alternate to the table?
I can sort of address how I've worked through this scenario in the past as an example that might work for other projects. So I was working on a primarily masonry facade project with several different masonry veneer types. And the sort of like architectural character of the facade changed based on the designer's vision for the project. So we had a bunch of different coursing changes, and there was also some really unique coursing in the project that had to be kind of thought through. In addition to having a mixture of granite base, cast stone, brick, and other masonry materials. So it was a pretty complicated project. But when we got into the detailing of it, we realized that we needed a third party review. So I reached out to the Masonry Institute of Michigan for a detail review, and the Masonry Institute of Michigan said, okay, that's cool, let's do that. Would you mind if we brought in a mason contractor to help with that effort and kind of provide some feedback? So they scheduled a meeting with myself and my counterparts at the firm I was working for, and we sat down and did a page turn of the details. And I had the opportunity to ask the mason firsthand all of my questions about, like, what do you think about this lipped brick detail? What do you think about this flashing detail? How would you do this? How would you do that? And we just walked through every detail step by step, which was so, so, so valuable. And we ended up incorporating all of that into the mock up drawings, into the final details. We talked about it all again when we reviewed the mock up. It was sort of like a full circle process. And that was all initiated through the Masonry Institute of Michigan in my case. So that one it didn't come through the CM, and it didn't necessarily come from the mason contractor, but having kind of like a neutral third party like the Masonry Institute really helped out this project in particular.
Can we clone her?
What?
Can we clone Amy?
I know, right? We need an Amy in the northeast part
Holy
of
moly!
this. Yeah, right?
For real, like that's the stuff I've been saying for years, right there. That's how it should be happening. That's all.
That's sort of a workaround, really. It's a great workaround because, contractually, I can't reach out to subs
I
directly.
never knew that. So that's really interesting.
I can do that through the Masonry Institute of Michigan, as long as the process we're all talking about is just a design review. So, like, I guess in theory, that could have been a little bit risky for the mason contractor because they weren't yet officially awarded the project by the CM. It seemed likely that they would have been at that time. So I think that they were okay with kind of like getting involved and taking that risk. So it might be kind of a case by case judgment call for the mason contractors on whether they have the time to give in situations like that. But this worked out great, and they did end up getting the job. They built it, and they built it per plans, per our discussions that we had.
I think no matter what mason contractor you are, you'd be smart to do it because at the end of the day, even if you have nothing to do with that job, you're letting somebody know about how badass masonry is. Which now the next time you go look at something, you might now the next 10 jobs you're going to be thinking more masonry. So you know what I mean. In my head, it's less about getting that job. It's back to Amanda educating.
Well, and I think it becomes the design group becomes a little bit more comfortable with it.
Yep, relationships.
Yeah, you're building a relationship with the expert mason contractor. It's really valuable, especially when we wanna see more masonry in the field because of all the benefits that it has. But to piggyback off of the experience Amy had, I feel like Phil, he then there's other steps past the review process.
I think it all depends on your area, Amanda. Like in Massachusetts, the bidding laws are so wacky and crazy. We're not given the opportunity. I think in other areas, this is something where somebody could go to Phil. Hey, I got a chance at this job. What I mean, can we go through this? For me, like I said, Massachusetts bidding laws suck. Basically,
Yeah.
my hands are tied. So I do feel there's plenty of times where you can. Okay, Phil, what can we do here to get rid of some of this rebar?
Well, not even just get rid of it. So what I'm saying is, and it's something that we don't I've tried with a few projects here in New York. I don't cover the Massachusetts area, but you do work in this area. So what Phil's doing is, quote unquote, we'll say it loosely, flipping projects where, and Phil, please come in when, please.
So first, Paul, yeah, I definitely sympathize with your crazy bidding and all that stuff in Massachusetts. And so, first and foremost, I just want to say, we have a lot of masonry work here in Michigan. So if Cantarella and Sons, is interested, things are much better here.
It's cold.
So, no, but so I'll give you an example. So on Monday of this past week, I got drawings from one of our contractors who was bidding a school in northern Michigan, and I got the drawings. It was literally a rectangular building, and they had I think the walls were 16 foot tall. They had 8-inch block walls, full height, all the way around the building, and a gable roof. And I was looking at the drawings, and all these walls were surrounding a steel framed building. And so the contractor said, "Well, what the heck's all this steel doing here? Why can't we just bear the roof trusses on the walls?" And I was like, that's a really good question because all the reinforcements there anyways. So why don't we just use them as load bearing walls? And so I gave him all the information that then take back to the owner to get rid of this steel structure and just use the masonry as a load bearing building and provide a value alternate for that savings, And so, I mean, a lot of our contractors are very good at looking at a job. And I mean, if it's a square or a rectangle with only a few openings in it and it's not masonry, then you probably chose the wrong material. But I mean, it's not even that simple. I mean, a lot of them can look at buildings and, especially like Amy had mentioned with all the different veneer materials we see. I mean, we see jobs with CMU veneer, brick veneer, cast stone, limestone, sometimes all in the same veneer. And sometimes just because of those veneer choices, it lends itself more to a concrete masonry backup just because of all the anchorage requirements. And so, I really benefit from a lot of our contractors having kind of their eyes open, I guess I would say, and just looking out these opportunities. And if we can provide some value at bid time, to the owner or to the CM by using masonry for load bearing. That's what we do. And I mean, we're pretty successful at it. Flipping projects, whatever we want to call it, but I mean, it's picking the most economical solution for a project, which we try to limit it to the low hanging fruit, which would be masonry jobs. It works out a lot, and so it's not we're trying to bash on other materials, but I mean, masonry is a proven construction material, and if it fits well in the project, then let's just use it.
So can you explain, so let's say Paul brings up, he's working out of Michigan and he says, "What are we doing with this project? Let's see if we can do load bearing masonry." Now you give the information to Paul. Paul is then giving it to the owner, but what's happening from that point on? Like, how does the switch actually happen?
Well, the owner then would have to re-engage the design team and say, "Hey, we can save $500,000 on this job if we, use masonry, and obviously the designer is going to have a fee to redesign it because they have to redo their drawings and all of that. And so some of our contractors will include that re-engineering in their savings, and so ultimately the designers still get paid to redo it. We'll help them through the MIM, they reissue drawings, and we're kind of off to the races. And that way we kind of have involvement during that redesign to make sure that things aren't getting over engineered or over detailed, and to make sure that we're coming up with an economical solution. But really it has to come from the owner or the CM saying, well, hey, we're going to spend all this money that doesn't need to be spent.
Right.
How do we use this more cost competitive option?
And this is the type of process that lends itself way better to a CM at risk delivery method, meaning, when the first sort of like stab at pricing out the project happens, it's usually during DD. Sometimes it's sooner, but the architects and the engineers haven't fully designed or engineered the building yet at that point. So if that pricing information comes back at that point in the process, it's not like too far gone. Like obviously there's going to be some rework, but it's not nearly as much rework at that phase to catch it during DD pricing than it would be after it's complete. So that's another reason that I'm seeing a lot of projects go that way in terms of like CM at risk delivery method.
Yes, limiting the amount of rework. Absolutely.
It's been a while, really, that we really started hitting out in New York, and I think I got to start pounding some pavement now. I guess I've kind of forgot.
We'll be the dream team.
No, no. I mean, seriously, so I definitely starting to have some good relationships with some of the general contractors. Right, it is. I know at that point it's early enough that I can pull something off out that way. It because like I said, the bidding is nowhere near like mass. So I guess I got to start doing my work too. I guess.
Yeah, well, and it's for the betterment of for masonry. Phil has had over 20 successes just last year where I've taken more of a sales approach and I'm like, hey, this is what we offer. So, but it's much easier and smoother process if the contractor brings it. So with us at UMI, we hire a engineering consultant to do what Phil does. Phil is lucky enough to be an engineer by trade. But so we offer the same resources because Phil and I are both on the same page as far as like we've got to bring this information to the forefront of the conversations. And if it's not that project, like say you bring a project to the table and it doesn't flip, but maybe it brings it to the forefront of their mind on the next project of, hey, let's see where load bearing masonry would come into play.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like Phil said, it's not about bashing the other
No.
materials. It's back to educating. It's everybody's been outpricing us because they're doing it. They're specking it and they're building it wrong. So literally, it's back to stupid educating, and he's killing me with the whole thing with the steel, the beams. I mean, I see it all the time. You got the masonry walls, and then they got the steel beams in there. Why isn't it resting on the block? That's a great one. But again, it's this is how we've been doing it for the last 30 years. I know it works. I know it's going to pass everything, structural wise. Let's build it. But again, it literally back to your first words, educating.
Well, and I think that's like when the original, or one of my questions was about trends and what we're seeing is I think there's just a lot more contractor involvement. Like Amy was saying, it's just this collaborative effort. And hopefully it's a trend that's here to stay because we're going to build better buildings if you have the people that are actually building them and the people that are designing them coming together. We're going to create a lot of successes. And hopefully that's where the momentum comes and people, I think sometimes people had a bad experience with masonry 20 years ago with some of these stories I hear, and they have that bad of a taste or that just the stigma, and then they just choose not to design with it for whatever their reasons may be. And it's like, well, like you said, we've been doing it for this long. Well, we're just going to keep doing it that way. Where Phil and I kind of have this ideal of, well, it doesn't have to be done that way. Let's do it differently. So I feel like we're all moving in the right direction. And it's voices like Amy's, it's voices like yours, Paul, Phil, and myself that are just, we're here and we're trying to inform. And I remember one of the conversations Amy had. I think I asked you, like, how did you learn? There was a method, like a math equation or formula method You're like, well, it was one of the older guys in the firm and he taught it to me. And then like once he was gone, that information went with him, you know?
So that was a coursing discussion, and I will bring it up only because coursing and bonding continue to be a huge issue in our industry. I was just on a job last week where not a single opening in the building was in bond. And so the contractor had to cut block at every single opening and every single corner in the building.
That's awful.
And I have pictures. I have pictures that I use to cry myself to sleep at night. But it was Amy's rule, I mean, if the first number is odd, like a 15-foot, the second number is a 4-inch. So 15-foot 4 is coursing, 23-foot 4 is coursing. If the first number is even, like 24-foot, it's an 8 or a 0. So 24-foot 0 would be coursing, 32-foot 8 would be coursing. And it's a very simple rule to remember. And so, I mean, we've been really pushing that here in Michigan. But the last closing thought I had, Paul, to your comment on the steel framed construction with a full height block veneer in that case, the absolute worst case for a block wall is for it not to be load bearing. It's counterintuitive to what most people think, but if you actually add load to a masonry wall, it performs better and you can actually space your reinforcement out further if you have it in a load bearing application. The worst case scenario for any masonry wall is for it not to be load bearing because it inherently is a very good material at resisting axial loads. And so oftentimes people think they're doing something right by making it not load bearing, but it's actually a worst case scenario for the wall, And so, yeah, we covered a lot of ground here today. I think we could probably still continue talking for a long time.
I was just going to say this conversation, we're going to have to do parts. This was part 1. We'll have to do parts 2, 3, 4, and so on.
No, you're definitely, because you definitely could still go.
We could just talk about it for days. And I think it's just really important that we all come together. And the whole objective of this episode was that we can, in fact, have conversations from an architectural perspective and a contractor perspective. And there is a happy medium and a good compromise. And it all is for the betterment of building better buildings.
30-something years, and Phil just educated me on a masonry wall, what he just said at the end.
Yeah.
So think about that.
It's really exciting. And we just thank you so much for listening. And thank you for being a part of this episode, both Paul and Amy. And we hope to have many more episodes ahead of us. You can listen to Masonry Principles on Spotify, Google, and Apple. Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yep,
It's a good discussion.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Masonry Principles. To continue the conversation, be sure to reach out to us by visiting masonryprinciples.com.